Hello and welcome to Round Robin. I'm your host, Robin McCormick with the City of Hampton. And today we're going to talk about a very serious issue, which is domestic violence. October is an awareness month, and that's the reason it popped up, but it's important to be aware of this issue all the time. My guests are from Transitions Family Violence Services, Saneu Dieng and Jasmine Andrews. Welcome.
Thank you for having us.
And you guys represent different perspectives. Fairly new volunteer working with people and the new executive director. Congratulations.
Yes, thank you so much.
Why is this such a problem? Like, why does this continue? Why are people, often the man abusing the woman primarily, but that's certainly not the only case. It happens in same-sex relationships. It can be reversed, and men can be very shy and uncomfortable about coming forward. But why do people in our society abuse the people they love the most, supposedly?
Well, it's all centered around power and control. It's a pattern of behavior. So there are several root causes that we can look at. If we have a young man that grew up in a home where there was domestic violence, he watched his mom be emotionally or physically abused. If that is your first example of what a relationship is, you're going to grow up and mimic that same thing that you've seen in that household. And same thing for young girls. If you saw that your mom was put down or physically abused, then you correlate that to that's what a relationship is, and that's what love is.
How I'm supposed to be.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you know, what we talk about so often in our organization is also about the culture that we live in and how it perpetrates and continues to encourage violence, where we live in a very aggressive society where violence is used as a means to an end. And if men are not dominant and aggressive in their relationships or in their stance, they're considered weak. And of course, men don't want to be portrayed that way. So in a relationship, what you'll find is that someone has to dominate their partner, be in control of their partner, but it is intentional. This is not something that is, by accident. It is on rare occasion that a young man or young lady, if she's perpetrating violence, will grow up and say, well, I didn't know any better. This is, how I grew up. But it is all centered around power and control. And our job as an organization is just to make sure that we give the right information and address the myths and the facts and misconceptions around domestic violence.
Okay, so what are some of the myths and the facts then?
Yeah, so
it's more prevalent than I think most people think.
It is absolutely prevalent. People will think that domestic violence is an anger issue. And we'll oftentimes say we all get angry. We're angry at our bosses, but we don't call our bosses out of their names. We don't put our hands on our bosses. There is that self-control. So it's not an anger issue. It's very intentional that you're intimidating someone, isolating someone, threatening someone, physically, economically abusing them. Also, another misconception is that alcohol and drugs are the cause of domestic violence, and that's not the case either. So
they can aggravate a situation
absolutely
when someone already has tendencies and already isn't in control, because you do lose what control you have.
Absolutely.
If you drink too much or take, but it doesn't cause a situation to be there that's not there, right?
Absolutely. And then also just the misconception that it only happens to certain people, whether that's just women, it doesn't happen to men, which that is untrue. We do also serve male victims of domestic violence, and that it only happens to certain communities or those that are in a certain socioeconomic group, which is untrue as well. We see in our work, and even nationally, that it affects all ages, races, religions, socioeconomic, those are socioeconomic status, as well as those in heterosexual or same-sex relationships.
Well, let's talk about socioeconomics, because I do think that that's a myth. I think that what happens sometimes is that people with more means may not need the battered women's shelter as much. They may not need as many resources, but also they can be abused financially in such a way, woman decides to stay home, woman is 100% dependent, doesn't want to jeopardize man's career. I mean, there's a whole lot of things that go on in this very complicated dynamic.
Yes.
Right. Financial abuse is a huge problem because you might have the perception of always being dressed nice, wearing designer clothes, but yet the abuser may take your name off the joint checking account, take your name off the credit cards, and you are left destitute with nothing. And now he controls, well, now I'll go to the grocery store, and you can literally be living in poverty in your own home, but no one thinks that. So financial abuse is a huge factor in it, and becoming financially independent is actually a huge factor in getting out of an abusive relationship. So whether you are in the extremely wealthy end of it or in the lower socioeconomic standing of it, financial independence is the key, which a lot of women tend to miss out on or not have available to them.
It's a huge barrier for our clients, and our focus as an organization really are women in need of housing, education, and resources. We call it the Win Her Center, and it's where our clients can really come in and get the resources that they need to be self-sufficient, learn about budgeting, how to save their money, because too often we see our clients come in and they don't have anything, that the bills weren't in their names, they weren't unable to work or pursue an education, so they find themselves starting over and sometimes even have kids. So what we've done is in our transitional housing program is really work with our clients to transition them into permanent housing, but with the goal of being self-sufficient and never finding themselves in that abusive relationship, again, not only from the emotional and the physical, but also the economic and financial piece.
Well, one of the things too, I think, and I don't know if it's just the clients I saw when I used to volunteer there or the circumstances, but once a woman has kids, she is more dependent on that partner because either she stays home or there's more financial needs or you want the kids to have the father and how does that cycle? And some people saw the potential before kids are going to fix it, or he'll be different.
Well, yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, children, the barrier for some of our clients is childcare. I mean, it's extremely expensive these days. So yes, you do become more dependent on your partner, especially if they're the breadwinner. A couple of years ago, we also started to explore a conversation and get involved with our state coalition around reproductive coercion, and really talking to our clients about what are your rights, and how to really advocate for yourself there. But having a conversation with some of our clients, we found out that they weren't allowed to use contraceptives, or it wasn't by choice that they wanted to be pregnant, that this was something intentional on the perpetrators and to keep them in that abusive relationship and to keep the cycle of violence going and dependent. So as we also talk about healthy relationships as it pertains to the emotional piece and your boundaries, but then also just what are your rights to a healthy sexual experience and healthy sexuality and what that means, and letting your partner know that you may not want to have children this year, or the contraceptives that you want to use, and having that freedom in your relationship. And if there is a fear to have that conversation with your partner, or if your partner is prohibiting you from exercising that right, then there's something unhealthy that's going on there that can lead to possibly an abusive relationship.
Okay, so what are some of those signs? Because sometimes women see things that they maybe look past for a few times. So what are some of the early signs? What are some of the, it's sort of like, well, I'm not being physically abused, or I'm not being hurt permanent. And there's like all these little stages.
Well, it's a grooming process with an abuser. I know that during this conversation we've talked about he as the perpetrator, but I do want to be mindful and say that she can be a perpetrator as well. In the beginning, an abuser is never going to come out first and call you out of your name, put the stipulations in place on what's going to happen in the relationship, and physically strike you. It's a grooming process, and it can be very confusing in the beginning if you remember dating someone and you want to spend your time with that person. You may decrease the time that you're spending with friends because now you're courting. It's exciting and fun, and absolutely. And if that is something that you choose to do, then of course that is healthy. But then when it turns into your partner manipulating you about where you're spending your time, they want to be the center of your life and focus. That is when that isolation starts to begin. And that typically is the first sign that we'll see when a person, family and friends will say, well, I stopped seeing them. They stopped calling. I didn't know what was going on. And that is really beneficial to an abuser, because then when they start the abusive relationship, no one's around to say, hey, that's unhealthy. That's not right. They shouldn't talk to you like
the
that.
relationship anymore.
Absolutely. So that isolation piece starts, the excessive calling and wanting to know where you are, what you're doing, what you're wearing, and then you start to feel where your personal freedom is being taken. And that person is really trying to see how much can I control. And then there's the subtle verbal abuse and emotional abuse. You're stupid, you're fat, you're ugly. But then apologies follow that, and the apology is not, I'm sorry that I called you that, or that I manipulated you from not attending an event that you really want to do or joining with your friends and family. It's, you made me do that. If you know that I'm very protective of you or I'm very jealous, so don't do that again, and then I won't call you out of your name or physically strike you. So you'll find that an abuser will never take accountability for their actions. It'll always be put on the victim or on someone in the community or their family, or my job is stressful, this is why. So you'll see the isolation, then the emotional, and then the physical. And the physical can start as small as pinching, poking. When people think physical violence, they're thinking about the punching, the kicking, the strangling, and that's really in the mid-range. But it can start out right there. And then the intimidation and the threats. Some abusers only have to strike their partner one time, and then after that, it's just the look. It's the, what's going to happen if I get upset, and when we talk to the community about this, it's almost similar to when you were a child and your parent was kind of getting your attention and saying, stop doing that, don't touch all that stuff in the store. But just imagine it's from another grown person, and
you're supposedly in an equal relationship.
Absolutely, that claims to love you. And someone that claims to love you is not going to want to dominate you in that way, control you in that way. And have this possessiveness and power over you. An abuser will also use language like, she's mine, my property, and that just disassociates them with this as a person. It's a thing. It's something that I have, that I deserve, and then that cycle just continues to go on. And the community, when you're looking on the inside out, I would never be in that situation. And me and Jasmine were just actually talking about the statistics of that.
Right, because 1 in 3 women have been victims of domestic violence, and that's a really staggering statistic because there's 3 of us on stage, and it's like if you're just in a crowded room, you can just count off 1, 2, 3, and then likely every multiple of 3 is someone who is potentially a victim of abuse.
Now, what prevents, and I kind of have to answer this, but I'm going to ask you, what prevents a woman from coming forward? Like, I think a lot of people see it and know it, but either don't know what to do or ashamed.
Like, shame is a huge motivator, and why? Because we are the free women, we're independent women, and then to think that you let this happen to you and you're very ashamed of it. And then society, like in courtrooms, there's a lot of courtroom bullying that goes on that actually makes it very difficult for a woman to get her rights. And the worst part about it is people assume that the woman actually has the advantage in court, and because of that assumed advantage, people don't really sympathize or even actually analyze how the truth is that there's a statistic out there written by a lawyer that men actually win 70% of custody cases. And
that's a big threat too. One of the threats and intimidations, I'll take the children.
I'll take the children.
You'll never see them again.
Absolutely.
And an abuser knows already that that's the best revenge, to take the children from it. And also, for an abuser, it's a good way to get out of paying child support. And then on top of that, in terms of awarding custody, financial stability is a really important aspect to that. And just like with the abuser of financial abuse, like, he makes her destitute, and now when she goes before court with no money, and then they say, well, how are you going to support these children? So it's a very systemic problem, starting with levels of injustice and perception.
Absolutely. And the one that's hard for folks to really wrap their minds around is, how can you still love this person that is perpetrating this violence towards you? And what we try to help our community understand is, as a victim, and I'm going to refer to victims as survivors because it takes a lot to survive, even just in the dynamics of that violence, that you're holding on to who that person was in the beginning. And if you're constantly...
And who that person is sometimes in between. It's not like
absolutely.
a constant cycle.
Yeah, abusers are not monsters all the time. And they present themselves very well in public, very charming around their family and friends. So, you know, knowing that I can love this person and they're going to change. And when we are listening to our clients and support group is, I was just waiting for him to change. I still love him. I just want the abuse to end. And I know that he's had a rough time at work or a rough childhood or he's working through some things. And I just want to stand by him until, you know, he gets through those things. But that never comes until the abuser knows that I have to take accountability for my actions and I have to get help by myself without you because this is a problem that I have, not a problem that we have or you even have. So love is one of the reasons. And then we also hear religious beliefs. You know, what is my faith community going to think?
Right,
or
what are my vows?
Or what are my vows? I said that I was going to be here, you know, till death do us part. I have a commitment to this relationship. So we even find for those reasons, and I think even like Jasmine said, the stability of growing up. I want my kids to grow up in a home where they have their mom and their dad, not knowing that it's doing more damage to the children, hearing and witnessing the violence that's happening. So, and then also that I've been in this relationship for so long. Can I do better than this? That doubt. We live in a culture that shames women.
Especially if your self-worth is already battered.
Absolutely, exactly. Because you're playing that tape of what that person has been telling you over time. But then we also live in a society that shames women for being single, and even men. Why are you not married? Why don't you have children? So I don't want to go back out there and start all over again. At least I know what to expect in this relationship.
Now, I have to tell you, this has been a really depressing discussion, and it feels overwhelming and sort of like, you know, it's a huge problem and what can we do? So let's talk about some of the solutions that are available that you all provide.
Well, we provide intervention services, so we have an emergency shelter, 24-hour hotline, legal advocates to help navigate our clients through the legal system. They're not attorneys. Support groups to listen to women that are survivors, that are in the relationship, that don't quite know if they're in an abusive relationship and just want to talk with other women. We also offer art and play therapy for adults and children. But for the past 15 years, we've really been moving in the prevention side of things. How do we prevent people from even walking through our doors and experiencing violence in the first place? And we've done a lot of education with young people addressing the root causes. So we talk about media literacy. You know, what are you listening to and what are you seeing on television and what message are they giving you and why does that fantasy become our reality, and how does it shape the way that we interact with our parents and our teachers and our communities, and even how do we have relationships. We also talk about self-worth and just how do we view ourselves, and that's different for some young people as we talk about cultural differences and their upbringing. We also talk about, we do a fun activity, Act Like a Woman and Act Like a Man, and this comes from our state coalition, the Virginia Sexual and Domestic Violence Action Alliance, where we talk about what are the expectations of our society on who we are and who we should be, and how hard it is to break out of that box and do the right thing sometimes and have the right relationships. We talked about bystander intervention. You know, when I know that my family member or a friend is going through abuse, why am I silent? You know, because silence is deadly. You know, how do I speak up or intervene in a safe way for me? For me, it might not be calling 911, but it may be telling a teacher or telling a close adult friend that, hey, I know someone that's going through an abusive relationship. Or if I'm an adult, maybe going to my religious or faith leader about it. So we start talking about how do we prevent it, and we do a lot of awareness events and rallies in the community to engage people in that conversation, because it's still an issue that what happens in the home stays in the home.
Right.
And that's the hardest one that we've had to toggle with, and really getting people to speak up and speak out against domestic violence and prevent it with us.
So I feel like we've really just scratched the surface of the issue with the time that we have today. How can people get more information or get involved like Jasmine did as a volunteer?
Absolutely.
You know, we're listening to this and it's like, wow, we
Yeah.
need to do something. What should we do?
Yeah, well, definitely calling our 24-hour hotline. That number is 757-723-7774. So if you know someone that's in an abusive relationship, they can call. If you just want information or how to get involved and help us, that's the number that you can call. You can also visit our website at www.transitionsfvs.org, and there's tons of information on how to volunteer, donate in kind donations. We take gently used clothing to help our clients start over. We also take financial contributions as well, because all of our services are free of charge, because we understand the economic implications of
Right.
being leaving an abusive relationship. So those are ways to get involved, and then supporting our events. Is really important. Every October we do awareness events where we address some specific issues. So those are ways that people can get involved with what we do.
I'm going to just, Jasmine, what prompted you to volunteer? Because a lot of people out there might be sitting home thinking, oh, I'd like to, but I don't know. So what got you over that?
Well, I just witnessed a lot of abuse in the faith community, and personally I felt like somebody should not have to give up on their faith to get out of abuse. And so knowing that the people that you first call, you're not going to call a shelter first. You're not going to even call 911. The first people you report it to are the ones who are closest to you, like a congregational leader, a rabbi, or a pastor. And their reaction may be something along the lines of, oh, it's just two people heaped with sin and you need to repent and all that. And it's just, I noticed that was not consistent with what's in the scripture, and it's also not consistent with what the difference between right and wrong is. So I was prompted to volunteer to specifically speak on that issue to the faith community, that love is not an excuse for abuse, and if you really do love your neighbor the way you love yourself, then you would not allow you to be abused or let someone who is an abuser get away with it without receiving justice.
Okay. Well, thank you for being a volunteer, and thank you for this. It's important to talk about stuff that's hard to talk about.
Absolutely. And I'll
we
leave on the
don't want
note. I
to.
know, and it's a big issue, but
Yeah.
we can end domestic violence. We truly can. We just have to start speaking up and speaking out about it and getting involved, and not saying, well, just this organization is doing it. It's a collaborative effort and partnership that includes community leaders and volunteers to really get involved and say, what can we do to help individuals and families?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. I hope you've learned some of the signs. You've learned that you can intervene, that you can provide help, that you can volunteer, and that we can all educate our kids so that there are not future generations that continue this problem. Thanks for watching.